Hello, 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 and welcome to the Digital Orthodontist Live, the first and only live podcast for orthodontists. I'm your host, Dr. Kyle Fagala, and tonight I am quite excited to bring you part two of our debate on the pros and cons of corporate orthodontics. Tonight we'll feature the perspective of an OSO founder and orthodontist, Dr. Jamie Reynolds. And in case you missed it, we filmed the first half with private practice orthodontist Dr. Neal Kravitz a couple of weeks ago. And you can find that episode on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever podcasts are sold. As a disclaimer, my goal tonight is not to pump up corporate orthodontics or to tear it down. To be clear, I own my own private orthodontic practice. I don't plan on selling to an OSO anytime soon. Tonight's podcast has not been sponsored or initiated by Corporate Orthodontic Group. So why are we doing this? Jamie's just backstage thinking that out loud right now. Why am I doing this? I could be doing so many other things. It's St. Patrick's Day. Well, we want to cover topics that our profession often avoids. Tonight is just a conversation, and we are two men seeking truth. We are not the world's experts on this topic, although Jamie probably comes closer than I do. But we're going to do our best to be fair, balanced, and honest. Questions are difficult, sure, and the statements we'll give are just opinions, so don't take them personally. Ultimately, we hope that this conversation sparks conversation for you and it helps answer some questions that you may have. So, my guest tonight does not need an introduction, but we are going to give him one anyway. And there he is, as handsome as ever.
Forehead
This
as big as
is
ever. We can compare
right?
our lane this way.
Representing the pro orthodontic, probably that too, but the pro corporate orthodontic side of this debate, co-founder at Orthodontic Partners, which is a leading OSO, co-founder of OrthoFi, director at Embrace Our Warriors, and OrthoNew, which is the name of a home care kit for braces and aligner patients, lecturer, author, and an orthodontist at Reynolds Orthodontics with 4 locations outside of Detroit, Dr. Jamie Reynolds. Jamie, how's it going?
Good. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Happy St. Patty's Day. I got to play the applause sound for Jamie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
There it is.
Let's see if it's still clapping afterwards, right? Or the
Well,
tar,
we'll
do you have
see.
a tar and feather
You never
sound?
know. There's the sound of tomatoes hitting the screen. Yes, we'll
Okay.
get that in there
Get
just
that queued
shortly.
up.
So, let me finish the introduction. I love that, though. I'm going to be looking for tomato sound effect, and I'll get it in here. So, as I mentioned tonight, we're going to discuss the pros and cons of corporate orthodontics. Specifically, is corporate ortho good for our profession? Is the future of corporate orthodontics bright or bleak? How will corporate ortho affect the future of private practice orthodontics? And we're going to look at a bunch of different doctor-submitted questions about OSOs. What you'll also notice is these are the questions that I asked Neal a few weeks ago. And so I hope to not be accused of bias. Sure, Neal went first. I saw someone kind of mention that. Someone had to go first, as I kind of alluded to, scheduling nightmare. But here we are.
I'll own the scheduling nightmare. That was me.
Oh.
So I'll take the blame for
well,
that.
You are welcome to take the blame, but it is okay. So we're all busy, you know. So I see that we have an audience tonight. What I want to encourage you to do is you can leave a comment. We already have a big comment that I'll get to later, but I have one that says, Libby wants to know if Jamie is Ryan Reynolds' brother.
I'm not, unfortunately for me,
I'm sorry.
but probably
Sorry about
fortunately
that.
for him.
We all love Ryan Reynolds, so no. That's a great first question. That's a good icebreaker. So thanks for tuning in. You can leave comments like that inside the Facebook group. I'll be able to bring them up on the screen, and maybe we'll interact with them. I do have a quick message from our sponsor because, as you might assume, doing a podcast, while not crazy expensive, it does require some effort and some expense. And so it will be from my company, Neon Canvas. You're already number one in your patients' hearts. Neon Canvas will make you number one in Google's. As a full-service digital marketing agency specializing in orthodontic marketing, storytelling, and local SEO, Neon Canvas puts your practice on top in every category, making your Google ranking before and afters just as impressive as your patients. Well, almost. Visit neoncanvas.com to schedule, a free digital content audit and get in touch with the team today. Trust me, your practice is about to get busy. And then hopefully you have OrthoFi to help close all those cases. There you go. Okay, so enough with the intros. Let's jump on into this. We're going to start just as we did the last time by defining terms, because there is probably someone out there that's not super duper aware of the differences here. And I would love to get your perspective if nothing else. And so, Jamie, I'm going to ask you for a brief overview of corporate orthodontics. tell us about OSOs, DSOs, and then I want to also know what support orthodontic support organizations offer practices.
Sure. First, I want to just say a great job on the last podcast. I thought Neal did a great job. He's got a lot of passion, and I thought made a lot of good points. As you know, I was a bit reluctant to sit in this seat as sort of the face of the evil empire. You could have the Empire Strikes Back theme music when you started,
Man.
because I agree with a lot of what he said. And there was a commenter that said that I have the advantage of going second, which is true, I guess, but I don't have a ton to disagree with from this perspective. I do think that there's a few things that were potentially incomplete just because we have different experiences. So as we go, maybe we can poke a little bit at that. And then, I am co-founder of Orthodontic Partners. And so there are some questions that I'm going to give you my opinion on, but it's also the way that we do things at Orthodontic Partners. So I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but I also don't want to dodge any questions. So if you could help keep me honest in that regard.
Yeah.
I think Neal did a good job of explaining the differences. I think you have your private practice, which there's a bunch of different forms. There's obviously been there's some blurriness to it now because there's been a lot of consolidation that's been driven by doctors. A lot of those doctors have partnered with the OSOs. Some of them haven't. So there's sort of these consolidated doctors that still are owned by one tax ID number, as opposed to sort of a broader tax ID number that would be more of an investor-backed group, whether you have private equity dollars or not. And so there's your OSO groups that are doing orthodontics as a strategy. So the reason that they're in it is to, improve on what is already orthodontics as a successful practice, and however you define that, we can talk about that if you want. And then there's DSOs, which have been around forever. OSOs are relatively new, 8 or 9 years old when Smile Doctor started, I believe. And in my opinion, broadly speaking, there's I think 90 or 100 different OSOs and DSOs. There's an end OSO and whatever now. But I think if you think about DSOs that do ortho, they're businesses that are dental as their primary focus, and then they add ortho as a mechanism to keep the patient in-house and capture the revenue from the orthodontic side of things. So like if you're going to try to grow your business, you can sell more stuff to more people, you can sell more stuff to the same people, or you can charge more money. Those are the ways that you grow your business, right? So that's a way that the business folks thinks like, hey, instead of referring to somebody else, why don't we just keep it in-house? And I think that's, broadly speaking, the DSO model. And so I think, there's some differences between all three of them that we can get into.
Yeah, for sure. Real quickly, when you think of like the three main areas of support that an OSO offers an orthodontist who's looking to sell their practice, what would you say those are?
Yeah, there's the stuff that you talk about. There's HR support, there's accounts receivable, accounts payable to take some of the administrative stuff off. These days, finding new team members isn't the easiest. So, recruiting is a nice feature. Business strategy, I think, is also helpful if you have a good business team. These business folks that are sharp do a lot of homework and leadership support in your practice. So we are butcher, baker, candlestick maker in our practice a lot of times. So having some folks that come in that are dedicated to certain skill sets is really helpful. And I think, a good one will have collaboration as a big part of it. Both doctor to doctor and team member to team member, between different managers, between different treatment coordinators, between different doctors. And, we just had a meeting on Friday with 17 of our docs that are really engaged. And, the more collaboration that we do and the more transparency that we have in the strategic goals and whatnot of the business, the happier everybody is. So I think that's something that at least should be important to folks, that collaborative aspect,
Yeah. All right. Right on. Okay. So let's jump right into the belly of the beast. We're going to talk criticisms and common objections of OSOs. To be clear, to whatever degree this is necessary to say, I was told that I gave way too many caveats and prefaces and disclaimers last time, so I won't do nearly as many.
Yeah, bring it, man. It's all good.
Yeah, but I do want to make sure that that neither one of us is flayed over these conversations, and I know it's not that serious, but these are not necessarily my criticisms or my objections, and so there's one in particular, I think question 3, that some people were kind of making fun of the question. Well, these were questions that I received and from comments, so whatever it's worth. I do, though, think this is an obvious one to start with, is that whenever the topic of corporate orthodontics comes up, it's not long before someone mentions Orthodontic Centers of America or OCA. And so I always hear the narrative that today's OSOs are very different from those that failed in the 80s and 90s. And simultaneously, I see people always bringing it up. And so I want to know, how do they differ, assuming you believe that today's groups are different than those that failed in the 80s and 90s? Please explain to me why they are different.
Yeah, I mean, so that I guess would fall into the OSO type bucket, right? Because from what I understand, it was ortho
Right.
only. And so, I think there's a few differences. I don't think it's the same. They were an acquisitive strategy business, meaning they acquired stuff. So mergers and acquisitions, the acquisitions part, they were buying practices, but their strategy, their thesis was that we have superior systems of folks, so we can buy things on the cheap, and then we can put our systems in, and then the businesses will get better and we'll make money. So they did 3 really big acquisitions of bankrupt groups that had failed already, and you can do the research on the names and whatnot. And then, at the basis of all of this is this idea that the doctor is irrelevant in this, so that the doctor is a commodity. It might as well be a golf club, and if you can get a different golf club, different place, you might as well buy it from Dick's instead of wherever. I always tell people that we're the swing, so we're not the commodity, that's the club, or the swing. So the ball goes very different place depending on who's swinging it. And so I think that their strategy failed, that like commodity-based doctor strategy and the buy cheap and rehabilitate doesn't work for a number of reasons. They also, had some regulatory headwinds that don't exist anymore. And I think, at least, this is a bit hearsay, but I think there was actually some states that made rules intentionally to make them not be able to practice in that state. And then, there was a $70+ million fraud lawsuit put against OCA. And so, I think it's safe to say that they were doing a lot of things wrong. And, remember, as much as the business folks take arrows in all these conversations, that was founded and led by a doctor, all of that. Right. So it's not just the MBAs that are making bad decisions in this. Today, I mean, I think the OSOs, a lot of them, I know ours is doing the opposite strategy. So we're trying to partner with what we consider to be really successful practices from a clinical and business and leadership standpoint, build a really robust foundation of, best practices that we're collaborating and learn from each other, and then use that to sort of build the organization from the ground up, the opposite direction. By putting a ton of value at the bottom, rather than making it like a rehab play. So they're just apples and oranges. It just is. Now, maybe there's some DSOs that fall into that circumstance. I don't know. But, the major ones that we think about when we think of OSOs are very different from that, in my opinion.
Yeah, right on. I think that's a fair answer. Let's shift on into this. This is the one that caught some ire, but I've seen people say this. There was a long conversation that was brought up about this, but DSOs, OSOs, kind of at the end of the day when the conversations are taking place, often get accused of being like a pyramid scheme on some level. So hear me out. The claim is that those who get in first, or during a certain kind of open season, or during the initial stages of the gold rush, are going to reap the big benefits, but the doctors who sell their practices later will inevitably get less benefit from their partnership. And I think the idea is from the equity, or you could say that the private equity firm that takes it on the second or third turn or at that bite of the apple will get left holding the bag, or something like that. Of course, we've not seen this play out, and so this is sort of a future assumption, let's say. But do you think that's a fair criticism?
We've not seen this play out in ortho.
In ortho, fair enough, right? So,
right.
Is that a fair criticism? Is that not? Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, ortho is kind of the end of the food chain for all of this. I mean, private equity backed roll-up plays have been in other specialties, anesthesia, orthopedics, dermatology, all over the place. So it may seem new to us.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence out there. These folks are successful. So I mean, we can spend all night on this. And I think I'm happy to, right. I think there's a couple components, right? So for DSOs, let's sort of scratch them off here, because I think a lot of them are more mature. And I think that very few orthodontists are like selling their practices into them to acquire equity. I think it's mostly in the OSO space. And a lot of these OSOs are effectively startup companies. So, The leadership team isn't proven. The business team thesis team hasn't been proven. You haven't really seen. I mean, Smile Doctors has had a couple recapitalizations, and they're the first, but there hasn't been like runaway success in this yet. And so, I mean, I think it's like any other company. Like if you were to buy Apple stock back in the day, like you're going to make a lot more money off of it than if you buy it today. If you get in early in a company, and any company, whether it's your private practice or whatnot, you take on significant financial and growth related risk, and then it works, then there's typically more money to go alongside of it. So yeah, I mean, if you get into a company that's 20 or 30 years down the road, the equity upside is going to be smaller, just like every other company that is ever. If you get in on the early level, you also, like a lot of the folks with us at OrthoFi, like anybody that used OrthoFi back in the day, it's a very different product than it is now. It's still not perfect, but there's a lot of like rug burns that come along with growing a company. And so you have to go through that to help build. So I think that part of the question, the second is the pyramid scheme. The short answer is that it's not. And I think the confusion is driven out of a lack of understanding by how all the math works. It's super complicated. But I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but let's take, for example, a different investment opportunity like your house, right? So if you buy a house and you spend $1 million on it, and then later on you sell, and you pay cash, later on you sell that house for $1.1 million, right? You've made a 10% return, right? Mm-hmm. If you put $100,000 down for that house and you buy the same house and you sell it for 1.1, you made 100% return. And then the bank is the one, you can take the fees and the interest and all that to the side, but like you're investing a different amount of money for a different amount of return. And so I think, like, as you guys were talking about it, the question was like, if the business has debt on it, all of these businesses have debt on it. Any business that buys things typically has debt. Commercial real estate, for example, like there's huge commercial real estate companies, and not one of them owns any of the buildings that they're in. The bank does, and so there's the concept of leverage and highly levered versus not highly levered and whatnot. Most of that's dictated by the banks, but like the ability to insert borrowing somebody else's money, other people's money, bank money, which they're very strict about who they lend to. There's a lot of rules around that these days. There's tons of auditing requirements and whatnot. You can use that money, which is at a lower clip, and then grow businesses and add businesses, and then you can sell it for a lot more than you bought it for. And there's organic growth in there. There's a concept of, buying at one multiple, selling at another, which is called arbitrage. It's complicated, but it works. Okay. And there's two phases of it, frankly. There's the beginning where the companies are in really accelerated growth. So they're growing a lot. They're adding more practices. The practices that they are adding, if you're doing a good job, they're growing organically. And then later on, when the businesses get really mature, they're in more of a maturity phase, and there's different investors with different return expectations, So like if you buy a commercial real estate property to flip, and you're investing in it and putting in a gym and doing this and that, and then getting more tenants, selling it for more, versus later on when you're just interested in the rent, those are two different investments, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you're seeing with these young folks is like Orthodontic Partners or whoever else is in high growth mode. And I'm happy to sit down with a pen and paper and do the math for folks, but it does work, providing that you run a good business, so that you have to have a good business in place in order for all this to work in any circumstance.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like, how confusing is that? I'm sorry.
Well, no, I've talked to you about these things before. I mean, you're one of the first people that I spoke to about this topic, because I've always, if anyone's ever sat at a bar or at a meeting with Jamie and talked to him, it takes about 10 seconds to realize, oh, he's smarter than I am. And I mean that sincerely, certainly as it pertains financial things.
Either that
and some
or
of these higher level.
We've both been drinking a lot,
Well, yeah, maybe I'd had a little more than you at that point, but no, I think sincerely, you're one of the more intelligent people that I've really ever known, and especially as it pertains these topics. And so there is, to be fair, a point at which my eyes sort of glaze over a little bit where I'm like, yeah, I don't really know what he's talking about. I guess on some level, really the extent of the complexity of this issue and all those kind of higher level financial considerations. I kind of think what people are saying when they're talking about it being a pyramid scheme is not that there is an intent on the part of the organizers of such a thing to go in and, to build this thing and sell high on it and then leave others holding the bag. I guess it's sort of the idea that at some point, inevitably, an organization that has been predicated on these really like large, like historically large, at least in our industry, multiples on the value or the perceived value of a practice, that at some point it's not going to be able to continue to grow in an organic way such that the value is there as expected by those who invested in it. I think that is true if for some reason the organizations fail or they become sloppy, or we've seen this in other industries like the whole mortgage home crisis. I think high interest rates has sort of changed some of this calculus. And so I don't know if pyramid scheme is the right term, but I do think there's this expectation from certain people, and this is where this question I think comes out of, is that, okay, in 3 or 4 or 5 years, let's assume a couple groups have failed. Now, why did they fail? Maybe similar reasons to OCA. A $70 million lawsuit is not helping any organization. In that sense, would then those people that sold their practices to that organization later, do they stop getting the value out of that equity that they thought they would get? I mean, is that a fair way to look at that, assuming that happens? I mean, is that...
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if an organization fails for whatever reason, then the investment return is not going to be as good. I think, the thing that caught my ear there was that, larger than expected multiple returns. And that's true for us. But they're making this up as they go in orthodontics, and these guys are very smart. Now we can talk about what's called the capital stack and like who gets paid when and where. And I think some people are concerned with that. And like, this conversation is squarely in the deep end of the pool, right? And one of the reasons why Kaz and I decided to start Orthodontic Partners is our experience with a very sophisticated couple of private equity companies at Orthofy. And we learned about all this stuff, and we didn't make the best decisions sometimes about investment stuff, and we learned a lot. So I would say, you need to get great advice. And your Uncle Frank, who's the whatever attorney, tax attorney for your family, is not like the one to do the M&A, mergers and acquisitions stuff. Like, it's somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And like the other thing is that, ask how the equity is structured. We insisted that Orthodontic Partners was 100% common stock. So that means that the private equity guys, the founders, and every person, butcher, baker, candlestick maker that gets equity is the same share, so that any event that happens, it's all treated the same. So this idea that the PE guys are running away with it, there are circumstances when they would do that, right? But it's usually not when the things are successful. And I think like judging MySpace, that MySpace failed, and saying that social media was a stupid investment has probably not turned out very well for the people that thought that. So this multi-site mergers and acquisitions based concept has been proven around. We're not familiar with it. So the idea that like there's Bernie Madoff at the top of some of these PE groups, there isn't, and there shouldn't be. Now, I'm not familiar with every structure, but having common stock is a very good place to start. For whatever companies that fail, like that's not good, so.
Well, there is the one DSO, and I don't want to name names on any of this. I'm trying to avoid that, but that the shareholders, the doctors, have sued for the ability to see kind of how the stock is structured and some of those kind of things. And so I think those horror stories kind of stand out as like these confirmation bias examples of people's overall negative opinion of something like this. And so my resting assumption is that in a world like this where there is a little bit more risk on some level, and you should know that going into it, and if you're super risk averse, either don't do it or try to get all your cash up front and forego the equity. I think the thing is that most people have, when they sell, a sort of upside view on this, and if it doesn't work out as such, well, that was the risk. I don't want to spend too much more time on this. You cap it off, and then I'm going to go to this user question. Go ahead.
Well, just remember, like, if you're looking to value your practice, if you're going to the beach, it's less valuable than if you're going to stick around, right? I think you can, like, if a doctor's built a great practice, them staying and being engaged is more valuable than if it's not. So if that's your strategy to wait to the end, then I wouldn't expect as big of a return there as you want. And
Yeah.
I would be thinking like, if what's the strategy of the business? And it seems like they're just sticking a bunch of practices together to try to get a big multiple that don't have any like historical business relationship or whatever. Like that's probably not building a great business. They're treating doctors like a commodity. That's probably not a great business. If they're talking about long-term strategy and culture and values and all that stuff and how they want people to stick around, and they're offering a lot of equity to the doctors, both the ones who come into the practice and a pathway for the younger doctors to sort of take over for them, then that's probably a business that's going to last longer, and that's probably going to have more value to it in the long run. So if the value of the business over the long run is important to you, I would be thinking, if nothing else, about, does the strategic vision long term make sense? If I was running the company and wanted it to be successful, would I do it like this? And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, right on. So this is a question that comes up later in our script, so sorry to go off script, but I think it's a good one, and someone asked it, so I want to get that in there. And it kind of goes along with what you're saying. What's going to happen when owner equity docs leave an organization like Orthodontic Partners or Smile
Mhm.
Doctors or whatever? What is the strategy to keep that new doctor who's maybe not had that experience of building this thing from scratch, maybe doesn't have as much buy-in, let's say theoretically? There's obviously going to be other examples of that, but what have you guys strategized around, just specific to your group, to make that still successful and to still have organic growth such that the organization is more profitable tomorrow as opposed to today?
Yeah, I mean, I think those companies that the doctor sticks around for a hot minute and then leaves, is not the way that it goes. I think, and you guys talked about it the other day, that continuity of care in combination with mentorship is really important. That's how orthodontic practices have been successful over the generations, right? So building in a like engagement for the doctor who sold to the business or joined or partnered or whatever word you want to say, is really important. So keeping them engaged for a period of time is important, and so them having skin in the game, equity, whatever you want to call it, is important. The second thing is having a pathway for a new doctor to come in and be mentored by that exiting doctor. So, at least from our perspective, we're kind of, and I think some of the other OSOs are doing this, we're wading into a little bit of uncharted territory because the practices that we're partnering with are pretty darn impressive, And so Stuart Frost just don't grow on trees, neither did David Sarver. So, that mentorship and collaborative environment has to be really strong in order for our practices to continue to not, to continue to grow, much less not fall off after they're gone. And so, in order for whichever companies wind up being successful at that, they're going to have a really big emphasis on collaboration and partnership for the young docs. Does that mean that it's going to be as lucrative as if people went out and got loans and built their own business? Probably not. I mean, the people who are going to be most successful are the entrepreneurs and the ones that go out and take the risk, and that's going to be the case forever. But there's a bunch of reasons why I think there's less people who are going to wind up doing that in this next generation of orthos. And I think OSOs are sort of filling a layer in that cake. So the cake, it has another layer to it now, maybe a couple. And I think, for a variety of reasons, some of these younger docs might fit really nicely in that and have, in our practice or our organization, for example, we have millions of invested dollars with 12 associate docs who are now partners that were associates when we started the thing, or when the practices bought in. So that transition from associate to partner to ultimate replacement and is super critical for any one of these businesses that wants to be meaningful for a long period of time.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for answering that. I do have to give a shout out to myself
That
for
was your question?
did Kyle invest in a tanning bed? There's some real copper tone happening tonight. Well, I have to sort of admit a couple things. Jamie, and this is no offense to you, he has sort of a brighter, bluer light on himself, and so he looks a little wider than he actually is. I think Jamie in reality has a better tan than I do, but when you have almost translucent skin as I do, you get some warmer stage lights, and then I do have some self tanning lotion on. So
It's reflecting off
just
your hair, right?
a trick of the trade. And then Anna also always applies makeup to me. So yes, there's a lot of effort that goes into producing a false skin tone. Don't look at my hands because they're way wider. All right, let's shift on into this if we can. This is a really common question. I guess first off, just sort of a yes or no. Did you ever work in a corporate setting before starting Orthodontic Partners?
I did not. I graduated residency on Friday, and 8 a.m. Monday morning, I was at work. I had
Good for
no
you.
room on my credit cards. I would have rather been in Ibiza or wherever the kids go these days. But I was broke. So Monday
Yeah,
morning, I was at
same.
work.
Same. Well, either way, you've had tons of conversations with doctors, team members who've worked in corporate dental, corporate orthodontics. Obviously, you have orthodontic partners and so on. In your experience, to the degree that you can speak on this, do you feel that work satisfaction by doctor and staff, does it improve? Does it stay the same? Does it decrease? And this is after, of course, selling to an OSO.
I mean, I think it probably does all of those things depending on where you're at. I think, if you're in an acquisitive business, meaning you're adding, companies to your portfolio, this should be really, really important to you. Because integrating of new folks into the organization is, if that's your strategy, is to, mergers and acquisitions, you've got to become really good at that. And it's got to be a net positive for them. And so you should be really measuring that. You should have data on that, and you should have a track record. I think, from an OSO perspective, as these companies mature, a lot of them are still young, then things get easier as you go along when systems are more robust. Our office or our organization just switched payroll, for example, because we can afford a more sophisticated payroll mechanism now that we're a little bit bigger, which is a pain in the butt to switch, but now that we're there is much better, and so some things a little bumpier when you're younger, but I think, like one of the things that everyone goes through is there's fear, especially with the team. The doctors kind of made the decision, and so the team has heard horror stories about corporate this and corporate that, and so I think there's fear no matter what. We didn't have anyone in our practice quit over it, but we did have some people think about it, because they were afraid. But I think in a good organization, once they see that there's folks that are helpful to them, that they're getting some different and new and better benefits, that everyone's worried that you're going to cut their wages and whatnot when you come in, and I think just to say in general on that, like if you're going to go and your target is a really great practice, I think you don't have to be a savvy investor to think that it's more than just the doctor that is contributing to the value of that practice, right? So then if you're going to write a big check to the doctor and then come in and fire all the staff or cut their wages or whatever, that's really stupid, right? Like you would immediately ruin the value of the business. So, some people that may be their strategy, but it's not a good one, And so I think once that they get through that, then I think things do well. And we have tons of people that were working for us before that are working for us now. COVID, it was a lot more disruptive to our business in the labor environment than anything that happened with growing pains in the business. So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm sure, there's people that want sort of a bloodthirsty response to that. And there's some that kind of expect sort of a political answer. I think the reality is I've heard examples of all that. I've heard of staff that were able to get new roles and better roles and something that, kind of seized on their unique talents given in a larger organization. And then some that hated it. I guess I would say on some level, this is up to the doctor to consider that as they consider this sale. And if the goal is just to sell and to give up and to tune out and to turn off, it's going to impact the team. And so it is a thing where we have a profession where we talk about our teams as being our family and we're so invested in them. And then if you go into a situation like this and you sell and then you don't care about that, or if you pick an organization that by reputation doesn't care about that, I think you'll get what you deserve there. I don't mean to sound like so severe there, but
I think honesty in the process on the part of the buyer and the seller is super critical, and to the seller, both to the buyer and to themselves. So like if you're telling yourself one story, but the answer really is that you just want to go to the beach, like then you might find yourself in a circumstance where you're like, oh man, but if you want to be a bigger part of a team or help build another business or X, Y, and Z reasons why you might not want to do that, then you might be satisfied, but I think really doing your homework is super important. And like anything else, going in informed will change the satisfaction. And again, I think it's up to like you said, up to the doctor to steward a great transition for the team.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift on. We have so many questions left, and I hope you are as engaged out there as I am. This is great. Thank you, Jamie. This is another really common concern. If I sell my practice to an OSO, how many changes should I expect to see? Are they going to make me change my brackets, aligner systems, number of hours I work? What about healthcare options, payroll, practice management systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And then even though I might be promised no changes, do those promises ever change, or do you foresee them changing? I know that's a multifaceted question. You'll probably just speak specifically to Orthodontic Partners, but if you can speak outside of that, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had one practice at the beginning, and then we had two. And then, we kept two for a while, and then I was like, well, I'm never going to have more than two practices because this is hard. And, never say never, I guess. But, once we added our third and fourth practice, we added them a couple of weeks apart from each other. It changed the way that I felt about an organization, taught me a bunch of lessons, right? So like, I think, Kyle, you've got two practices, right?
Yep.
And so you're the doctor that's treating there, and that you're there often enough where even if you don't have a great reporting or KPI suite that you're reading the numbers and et cetera, what's going on in your business because you can feel it. And when I went from 2 to 4 practices, I went from knowing what was going on in my business because I could feel it to not knowing anything about anywhere and feeling like I was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. And once you have multiple locations, it becomes very important to understand what's going on when you're not there, and the feel component goes away. So you really can only rely on systems and numbers at that point. If you've ever bought a practice and they had a different practice management software, or a different payroll system or whatever, it's a huge pain in the butt. So most doctors would immediately make that switch. So a lot of these, all probably of these bigger corporations, I'm assuming, care about key performance indicators because that's how they have a feel for what's going on in their business. That's how the finance and accounting people work. So they're going to want that. So they're going to want to build in some reporting suite, which is probably going to include, for sure, like payroll systems, probably a phone system so they can understand the phones because they're super important. In our deal, we put in Orthofy, not because Kyle's and I mandate it, but because our business folks think that it helps grow the business and measure it. I think that there's a good business case for making the practice management software standard, but we have had a hard time finding a practice management software that could deliver on their promises. So, and that's a huge pain in the butt to transition. And some mistakes that we've made is going a little bit too quickly there. But I would expect systems. From a change perspective, I don't know. I think there's probably a lot of variability. I think most of the OSOs leave your clinical stuff alone. Is there changes that we can't foresee? Like if I tell you that, we're going to keep faxing you stuff, and then one day I decide I'm not going to use a fax machine anymore, like I think that's probably legitimate. I mean, we used to take our team members to a whole bunch of meetings, but now we can do Zoom meetings, so like we can get just as much collaboration internally and, things like that. The cheese moves a little bit, things change. So I would say that the best organizations are going to keep the promises that are material, and then having some flexibility to adapt when business circumstances change to put the best business systems together is in everyone's best interest in that circumstance.
Yeah.
I don't know if that stands on the topic, but yes, there'll be changes, but.
Yeah. I guess I would just say that if there are any changes that you're not going to be comfortable in, either I'm speaking for the doctor that's considering a sale to an OSO, DSO, whatever. I would either A, get it in the contract, or B, don't do this.
Yeah, do your homework to understand, if they're going to come in and like turn everything on its ear, that's one thing. I know that, it was mentioned that everyone's going to get pushed aligners down their throat and whatnot. And like, I think that if you're a dental-based organization and you don't have a wealth of orthodontists handy, braces cases are a lot more difficult to manage. And there's certainly a lot more. Now you can talk about finishing and which one is harder to finish in and whatnot, but like you can get yourself into the ditch really quick with braces where it's sort of a slow burn with aligners. And so if I was a dental-based organization and orthodontists didn't grow on trees, maybe would I want more aligners in my thing? I mean, I think strategically that makes some sense, but I mean, good orthodontic based organizations aren't going to change anything about their great practices. They're going to encourage collaboration the same way that we have. So like what I call it is a push versus a pull. So I always learn by pull. I went and watched Dwight Damon speak and I said, wow, his cases look way better than mine. Mine suck compared to his. How do I do that? Right. So that was me pulling that information toward me versus being like, here's this bracket, go ahead and eat it. Doesn't it taste good? Right. Like that's push. And so I think with, I think, some of the early OSOs tried that, hey, everybody used Damon brackets, and it was kind of a push thing. And to their credit, they learned quickly and switched and don't do that anymore. And I don't think that's a successful strategy for orthodontists.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Hey, we have a nice message. This is great. Thank you for doing this, Jamie and Kyle. Well, that's sweet of you. We appreciate that. So we'd rather be out there doing a bar crawl for St. Patrick's Day, but we're here for you.
Two
Let's
Irish
shift into
guys,
this.
right?
Yeah, two Irish guys who did well, I think. So let's shift into this. This is going to be a conversation called To Be Fair. Private practice orthodontics isn't all rainbows and unicorns. One thing that OSOs and just sort of the last, let's say, 7, 8, 9 years of transition into this, it's illuminated for me at least that some private practice orthodontists weren't providing their teams with standard job benefits like health insurance, 401k plans, competitive wages, cost of living raises. Let me say that again. Some were, some weren't, okay? And yeah, there's probably some OSOs that aren't doing that as well, and certainly some DSOs. I am not trying to make an overall universal statement, just a generalization. I just hear that as a common objection or a common reason, let's say, to bolster why I joined a corporate orthodontic group. Well, they're going to, give my team insurance and all this kind of other stuff. I guess what I would say to that is that you can do that yourself. I think one thing, anytime I talk to someone like you or Scott Law or other people that are higher up in some of these organizations, what I learn is that among many other things, you're just really good at business. You've thought about this. You've had conversations about this. Oftentimes people that are at the top of these organizations have spent more time focusing on the organization and the business and the systems of all this stuff. And so that is obviously a big part of why they're successful. And so I guess my question comes down to this is, what are some aspects of OSOs that you think private practice orthodontists can learn from and can benefit from?
That's a tough question. I think it depends on the doctor. Some doctors are very sophisticated in a lot of different areas. Some are not. I think, the best organizations have really smart business people and really great doctors, and they collaborate, and they meritocratically collaborate. So like best idea wins. And it's not always the doctors that have the best doctoring idea and the business guys that have the best business idea. I think most of these business folks are extraordinarily smart and they work their and they're incredibly well researched. When we were with OrthoFi, Dave, the CEO, is a friend of mine from college, was in my office learning about ortho, and he spent about 15 minutes at the front desk. And I came up and I said, hey, Dave, I had a break between patients. He's like, hey, do you know you need to do this, 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 and this? And he'd like distilled all the things that I knew I needed to do, I haven't gotten to, and some that I didn't, in about 5 minutes. So their ability to distill out how things run and operate and efficiencies, and that is just a very different level. But you show them biochemistry, then their eyes roll in the back of their head, So we think about things a little differently. And I think building the best mousetrap involves having smart people with different skill sets, contributing to solving the problem. So, that's sort of not a great answer. I mean, there's just so much variety there. But these folks work their butt off, most of them, especially, they work like we did in residency, but they do it all the time. It's impressive. It's impressive how hard they work. So,
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, let's jump into this one. This is on valuations. And, I was kind of getting at this idea that, obviously OSOs, DSOs paying multiples of 5 to 9 times of EBITDA and, effectively 2 to 3 times of collections, if you want to simplify it as such, and you can correct me where I'm wrong because you're the numbers guy. But that is not the traditional valuation metric for a private practice. Chris Benson, I was sort of alluding this idea like, well, I wonder if private practice valuations will increase given the market. And Chris said that has not happened. Um, and part of me is like, well, I wonder why not, but I guess it just has not happened. So I guess the question, two of them, do you think that corporate valuations have had their sort of high level mark historically and that those will start to go down? Then will they ever come back up? How do you think that will go in the next year or two, maybe of sales?
I think, I mean, so this is another one we could talk all day. Let me peel
Yeah.
this a couple different ways. I mean, banks won't finance a doctor more than one times collections typically. So either the doctor to doctor sales financed internally or financed with a bank or some combination. And banks historically won't do more than one times collection to a doctor because, we're not as sophisticated business folks as they're used to dealing with. And we don't always make the best decisions. So if you're doing a doctor to doctor sale and there's any bank involved, then that's kind of be the cap. The other thing is that, it's changed, and I'm going to try to explain why I think it's changed, and then you can tell me if it makes any sense or not. So I think, historically doctors do doctoring, and, back 20 some years ago when I came out, their practices were $500,000, $750,000 in production. Like a really, really big one was $2 million, and so most practices were a practice, and they were doctor to doctor transactions. And by the time the doctor got paid a couple $100,000 a year and did their debt service that they had on the practice, there wasn't anything left over. And so that valuation for those type of practices hasn't changed much because there's not much left for besides doctoring. Now, around the same time, Align came into the market, and they added a new product suite that had appeal to a whole bunch more folks. And they've grown to be an incredibly humongous company and marketed a ton on our behalf along the way. Probably the most important company by far in orthodontics over the last 2 decades. They spent billions of dollars marketing. They're the title sponsor for the NFL and the Super Bowl, for goodness sake, like tons of money. At the same time, you had this increase in consumerism where, you didn't have to rely on your dentist to refer you to the doctor and you just go where they sent anymore. You got Google. And so you could search them up and then you could see reviews. And then if someone told you they need 4 buys and a headgear and you didn't want that, you can Google somebody else by the time you leave the parking lot. And then Align makes the S&P 500, right, in 2017. And so a lot of investors said, well, what the heck is a braces or an aligner company, an orthodontic company, doing as one of the 500 biggest companies, right? As well as, braces didn't scale with inflation. So in the 60s, braces were 2,000 and a car was 2,400. Today, braces are 5,500 and a car is 50,000. So you had all these factors. You had affordability, you had marketing, you had a new product. And so the market sort of exploded, right? And so Align right now, if you do the math, they probably add another 2 million cases per year to the orthodontic industry, not to mention what Smile Direct Club did, right? And so there's all this additional demand, and the orthodontic industry has grown at 3 to 5% compounded annually over the last however long. And what you had was a group of doctors that put on their entrepreneurial hat, and they went out and serviced some of this demand by growing their practices. They started buying businesses, computers came along that made systems tie together. And so you had a number of different orthodontic practices that started to grow in the amount of revenue that they generate. So now instead of the biggest one being 2 million, you've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, $12 million practices. There's a lot more cash coming through. And so what happens is that, a lot of people, I think, in this argument conflate what you're paid for owning your practice and what you're paid for being a doctor is the same thing. And I'm not suggesting that doctoring is not valuable. What I'm suggesting is that there are a bunch of entrepreneurial business folks, men and women, that went out and built businesses that used to be practices. And so the cash flow, and you take whatever person you want to stick at the name of it, my practice, a bunch of the other ones, Neal practice. There are doctors in our organization that get paid like doctors, and there's doctors in our organizations that get paid like owners, and private practices that have multiple doctors, right? So businesses have evolved that are more valuable than the businesses of old, because business is more valuable than a practice. And so now what you're seeing is that doctors are getting valued, practices are getting valued as businesses, and doctors are getting paid for both the doctoring part and the entrepreneurial business part, which many times is more valuable than the doctor part, right? So you have this new layer added to the cake. And so there's a lot of reasons why some of the stuff might be bad, but you know, probably in the last 10 years, in the next 20, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional dollars from outside investors are going to go into the pockets of these entrepreneurial docs, right? And not everybody's going to participate in that, but that I don't see how that is in any way, shape, or form a bad thing for our profession. You know, I mean, I think it's pretty good, right? Like, look at all we've developed a recipe for how you can grow your practice into a business that will become substantially more valuable than it was before. So I think that's the difference, because it's about how much cash flow is different between the entrepreneurial side and the doctoring side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love that history and that explanation. I guess what I don't understand, I'm just throwing it out there, and I
Sure.
want to move on to the next question, but if a private practice owner who's also an entrepreneur that does, I mean, you're right to say that there is a lot more to a practice than just what happens inside the practice now. I mean, as a digital marketer, there's a lot that you're building that represents IP that you're then selling to someone or handing over to someone ostensibly when they purchase your practice. Call it goodwill on steroids or whatever you want to say. There are systems that are more elaborate and sophisticated than past, hang a shingle type practices, no offense intended. Why then do I not get paid on a 5, 6, 7 EBITDA like I would if I sold it to a corporate group? I think that is my question. I mean, I
Paid
understand
by
either the
whom? By
money's
another doctor?
another doctor with funding from a bank, but the bank's not going to give it to them. I guess it's a question.
Yeah,
I
they're
guess
not.
I don't understand why the valuation's increasing given the corporate state in the market has not affected those doctor to doctor sales. I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not trying to sound greedy. I'm just curious why that's not been the case.
Well, number one, I think a lot of the doctor to doctor sales are happening with practices and not businesses. So like, or a fraction of a business, right? So a doctor is buying a part of a bigger practice
Right.
versus the whole. And so, but the ones that are doctor to doctor still are smaller. And a lot of those like million, million and a quarter, $1.5 million practices, the OSOs aren't really chasing around because there's not much upside from an investment potential there, right?
Yeah.
There's more upside in a
Well,
bigger practice
I'm 40. I'm
from
not
there.
planning to sell my practice anytime soon. I guess I do, and I'm sort of showing my hand a little bit. I like the idea of selling the practice to a single orthodontist, not necessarily to an organization. And who
Sure.
knows? I mean, that's many, many years down the road. It just seems like that should have increased that relative valuation of the private practice doctor. I'm not talking about the $1.5 million practice. I'm
I
talking about if
agree,
I got
Kyle.
a $4 or $5 million practice, why does that not demand the increased value? Because I think that value is there because you're selling something that's producing $4 to $5 million year over year. There is that tail value. I don't know if
Mhm.
that makes any sense what I'm trying to say.
It does.
I
I
don't
mean, I
understand
think
why a bank.
if you could sell it to another doctor and the doctor was capable of running it, frankly, because like not
Yeah,
everybody has the training, sophistication, or wherewithal to like run that or to service the debt, you know, then maybe you should, but it's just not. The doctor's not going to get the money to be able to do that. So, and I don't think
yeah,
whether or not we want to say, existentially, like what should be happening or whether DSOs or NOSOs should exist, we can have that debate, but like they're here, they're not going away. And I think the number of folks that have blood, sweat, and tears built businesses that could sell to one person for $4 million and sell to somebody else for $12 million, I don't think many people are going to pick the $4 million answer. So I think a lot of what at least I want folks, and I'm happy to be a resource after all this for anybody that's interested, is to just the rules of the game are changing. I think every person that owns a private practice or group should call up a couple of DSOs or OSOs or whomever they want to have them kick the tires and learn what the value of their practice is in their eyes and learn how to play by the new rules. And if your practice is valuable, they would say, okay, well, here's what we think about it. And here's what we would offer you. And if they think it's not, then they'll probably say, here's X, Y, and Z things that we like. And here's how you can make your practice more valuable if you ever want to do this in the future. And so at the very least, we should not have our heads in the sand. And we should
yeah,
be learning and understanding the new rules of the game, because the value of the biggest asset that any of us will likely ever own is changing. And I think it's important for you to understand so that you can do whatever you want on an informed basis. You can play the game better if you know what's going on. So,
Yeah. There's this very lengthy comment that's very detailed, and I can't see who's sharing it. And we've spent so long on this that I'm not allowing a response to this. But I think what this is getting at is that it depends on how long you plan to continue to practice. And I do think that if you have a very profitable and successful practice and you continue running it for 10, 15, 20 years, there is more value in keeping it than in selling it, even at a high multiple. And so I do think the calculus depends on how long you intend to stay in that practice or that organization. Do you agree with that?
yeah, and I think there's two other calculuses that are involved there. One, how early on in the organization you join. If you're after the second recap, then 100% you're correct. If you're before that, then there's a lot of value that's generated in those first 5 or 10 years. And so in the organizations that are the ones that become Coke and Pepsi of all of this, then there's going to be a ton of value created. And whether you're young or not, if you're early, you'll likely blow the doors off of what you would have made on your own. The other thing is the tax treatment. So the dirty secret among any wealthy folks is that nobody gets paid ordinary income, right? Because it gets taxed at 50%. So every politician that says that they're going to change long-term capital gains, they're not, because none of their donors will ever let them do it, because every Democrat and Republican, the rich ones that donate to them, all make all their money on long-term capital gains. So you trade your cash flow, that your previous income that you get taxed at 50% on, all of it, for equity that appreciates at a long-term capital gains rate, which is a huge multiplier on the actual income that winds up in your bank account. So there is tax treatment that's involved there too. So it's complicated. Get people who are smart and know this stuff to run the numbers so that you understand what's going on, is my best advice. And it's going to be different for everybody.
That's fair. Yep. All right. So let's shift into this. Very well said. Can you tell that Jamie knows about financial stuff? All right. This is a really common accusation, and I'll be honest, there's no study that exists on this, so what we're about to discuss is largely anecdotal and opinion-based, but Jamie has seen it at scale, so I think it's good to hear his opinion on this. The accusation is that OSOs have a clinical quality or standard of care that is lower. I think we would hear that said more definitively of DSOs. There have been some articles that have come out about specific DSOs and them pushing clinicians to do more crowns or to do more procedures to produce more. Maybe that's the worst and extreme examples. Specifically, though, to OSOs, and I guess even more specifically to your OSO, do you think that clinical quality is on average better, worse, or the same? And then we have some images we're going to show too, but start there just with that face, value question.
Yeah, I mean, the data guy in me says, it's a pretty subjective question, because I mean,
of course,
there's a lot of folks that we talk to even throw shade at the ABO and their scoring system. So like, how are we going to get people to agree on what's a well-treated case? I know that I'm doing the same stuff that I did, and most of the doctors in our thing, I think all of them are. I would say that we do have that embedded collaboration where we're all meeting and sharing our stuff. So I think that there's a chance that people could get better. I think it's probably variable all over the place. I think if you have an engaged doctor who's still working, they're going to keep rowing the boat, and I can't see a good doctor mailing it in front of the patient. They may go to the beach and like not come in, but there's not many folks that are going to mail it in the office. At least there's some, I'm sure, but so I would say that, my advice is like, hey, we have lots of people come to our practice and come look, go visit Cause and see the way they run things. We don't have anything to hide. And I would bet that Scott Law would say, come watch our practice. Something tells me that it would be shocking to most people how well the thing is run. So, I don't know. Clearly, I'm biased in all this, but I like.
Well, yeah, and in fairness, your organization features, Stuart Frost, David Sarver. It's like two of the Mount Rushmore clinicians of our contemporaries, Kozlowski. I mean, so yeah, I think this is somewhat of a softball for you. I guess I would say that I think This is one of those difficult questions because you have DSOs, you have OSOs, you have different ones, you have different maturity levels, you have different sizes. Yours is a relatively smaller one that's a little bit more focused and a little bit more, and don't hear this the wrong way, but maybe disciplined, you could say, or choosy or whatever. And that argument could work in the other direction from those that are larger. So I'm not trying to, again, paint with a broad brush, but I think it comes down to this question of continuity of care. In the early stages of an OSO or any organization as such, it's going to still be the legacy doctors, the owner doctors. I mean, obviously, at some point, the Stuart Frosts, the David Sarvers, and so on of this group will retire. They will be replaced. And so I guess the question becomes do the doctors that replace them, some of them, as you alluded to, they will be partners. They will be owners. They will be, recognizing the fruits of that equity. But there is some point at which an organization like this will rely on associates who have never been owners or equity holders on a large sense, potentially. Okay.
Yep.
Will they care? Will they care as much? Because in the traditional model, you sell your practice to someone, they take the keys, it's now theirs. Is that even a fair argument to strike that, well, yeah, right now it's fine, but in 5 or 10 years, OSOs, the quality is going to be crap. And that's what we've seen happen in the DSOs. I think that is maybe what the argument is.
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate argument, and I think it's a huge concern on our part. So, ask me in 10 years. It's a cop out, but like I can sit here and tell you whatever you want to hear. The question is whether we can do it or not, and it's a tall order. But there's a lot of things that have to go on in order to do that. It may not seem like it, but there's a lot of financial opportunity for the younger doctors now over the course of their career in this model. Again, if you can go out and open your own practice and build a $4 or $5 million practice on your own, then you're going to make more, right? So if you have the ability to do that, go do that. But if you're looking for something different, this is a bit safer. There's no risk really, except for the risk of your time. But that's the big business risk is, are we going to be able to sort of transition from some of these folks to some of the next folks? We have our work cut out for us, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair way of saying it. And I do think that is really the major, what do you want to say, capstone of all this on some level. Let's go into this. You actually provided some really nice slides. I love slides when I can get them. There's also this, continuing criticism of corporate pressure for organizations and doctors to be more profitable or produce more, things like that. And so you provided some data that I think is helpful. I love data. I love to be objective where possible. So kind of walk me through this. And then after this, we're going to jump into a little bit more rapid questions. These will be the doctor submitted questions. But let's talk about this first off.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was a slide that I had prepared before your last thing. So, but one of the questions that people say is, corporations force the doctors to put pressure on them to recommend more treatment. So this is a random sample of DSO docs and sole proprietors. So, they may be a group practice or whatever, but they're not technically quote unquote a DSO. And so the top is kept new patient exams, so about 20,000 new patient exams in each group. And then how many times treatment was recommended. So, I think one of the metrics that we don't really talk about, but is interesting, is sort of the integrity metric, right? So like, what percentage of your new patient exams do you recommend treatment for, right? And so if you're recommending on 100% of your new patients, then you're probably selling some things you don't need to be selling.
Yeah.
And so there's a 3% difference here in this, which isn't really significant statistically, but at the very least between DSOs and sole proprietors is in the neighborhood of the same. And that's a pretty good sized sample. So like the idea, at least from the data that we see through Orthofy Engage, and I'm sure it's different in different offices, right?
Yeah.
But
sure.
there's not this like broad sweeping proof. The other thing that I sent over to you is a slide, and it's a bit of a seeing eye chart here. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is actually a slide from our board meeting. And we just had a big investor meeting on Friday, and the slide was in there. So I don't know if you can see, but my practice is kind of down at the bottom, S&R, Splain Reynolds. Shout out to Larry Splain if he's watching at St. Patty's Day. He'd be mad at me if I wasn't wearing green, my mentor and the guy that started the practice. But
He said it was the only day that you could wear green, apparently.
Yeah.
So that's a Michigan State thing. Hey, do you mind if I drop this image in the Facebook group? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure. You can check it out.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
these are the things that we look at, right? So you have average case fee and wages, and we're looking at it. Not so much that like we're trying to chop the wages and bump up the case fee, but we're comparing it to what we think are relevant benchmarks. I think most people, consultants suggest that in the neighborhood of low 20% is a good amount for team cost. There's practices do it less, practices do it more, but we want to watch that from a benchmark perspective. We had, folks that were punching in on Saturdays at an office that wasn't open on Saturdays. So you only find those things out if you're watching, right? But this is what we're looking at. It's not some big bad thing. It's just a number of metrics, and we red, yellow, green them for practices. It's kind of like the oil light. Like, we're not looking at it unless it's red. And then when it turns red, it probably means that we need to look at it. So the numbers at the top are the one RG percentage. We have a thing that we recommend, which is a retainer plan, retainer guarantee. So, how are our folks doing at recommending and selling that? How many new patients have we added versus last year? So are our new patient exams growing or not? Should we pay attention to that? Booking window is super important. So how long from when you call does it take to get an exam? And we know from OrthoFi data that if you go over a couple of weeks, then the amount of people that actually show up decreases a lot. And then there's call connect rate. So how are you doing on your phones? Are you answering them? Kept new patient exam percentage, who shows up? And then the next one is that treatment recommend percentage. So just to show our underpants, if you will, on the top line there, you'll see it's in the 50%. That's 55 or 56. I can't see, but that's the percentage of new patient exams that Ortho Partners doctors recommend. And then the rest of it's conversion. TRC 0 is conversion on day one. What percentage are same day starts? And it flows through to overall conversion. So the reason why I'm sharing this is to just put a little bit of context and like demystification into like what some of these folks are looking at in the board meeting. And I don't think any of that stuff is unreasonable. And I think certainly with our business and with at least the data that we're seeing in general, I think that the fact of like pushing recommended percentage, sell more of this, isn't really happening. And like, we're not cutting crowns, right? So you can't just say, hey, sell more crowns and you go and do a crown in one day. Like, we have an extended service business. And I think, just as a little bit of a tangent, like, in order to get a sale, quote unquote, you have, a new patient exam that shows up, and then what percentage of those you recommend treatment for, and then what percentage of those you convert, your conversion percentage. So you have like 10 new exams, you recommend on 5, you converted 8%, 4 start, right? Doctors in general for a long time have treated sales like a really dirty word. And so what's happened is that there's all this variability in that number, the conversion percent. So it varies wildly. And so I think if you have integrity behind your sales, you're only trying to sell things to people that you would do on your own family, then that means it's good for them. And so it's probably in their best interest to do the treatment. And not everybody understands that, hey, my bite is off, but my teeth are straight. So why should I do this treatment? So understanding that sales component actually takes a lot of pressure off the integrity back component, because if you can make that number more of a constant, 80, 85%, so that over time, if you recommend treatment, then 80, 85% of those people are going to convert, then it becomes a marketing issue and not a integrity-based issue to increase your sales. So like, the best way to make sales have higher integrity is to get good at selling stuff. And there's a very, recipe type sales process that you can install that you can sell things with integrity, and it's not a bad word. So I would suggest, as a profession, talking about sales and becoming better at sales actually preserves the integrity, because now we can hire your business, Kyle, because it becomes a marketing conversation. If we want more patients, we just have to get better at marketing, and we don't have to sell things to people who don't need it. So, and just another aside, like those practices that I showed you at Ortho Partners, we're on that page is, several $100 million of revenue, right? Our practice is, who knows what we'll do this year, 10, 11, $12 million, somewhere in that range. Our recommendation percentage is 50%. So like, you don't have to be recommending stuff to people who don't need it in order to be really successful from a production standpoint. So I've gotten long-winded on that, but I'm obviously kind of passionate about it. And I wanted to
Yeah, no,
like
it's great.
share my thoughts on that with you because it doesn't have to be sketchy. In fact, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
Well, I think that's, to be fair, why I had you on this, because I think you do hold people's respect and you are data driven. And to be fair, you and Oliver and Dave and all those guys at OrthoFi, you know the data and you back it up when you speak. So I appreciate that. I do have some very kind comments. For some reason, I have a question from Renee Christine that is not showing up in my software, but I just noticed it and I want to shout it out. It says, appreciate that Jamie is being a straight shooter. This is all most of us want in a conversation like this. I
I'm trying.
agree. Yeah, no, of course you are. And again, that's why you were my top choice for this. And then also there's a plug here for Level the Curve. Good book, Jamie. I
Thank
don't
you.
know. I guess you planted that in there.
Yeah, that was me.
So
That was just
very,
something I think.
very, very crafty of you. I want
And
to get on
just
to,
to comment on the book real quickly, like,
yeah,
you know, my goal has been, if any of you guys have heard me talk before, is that I want orthodontic patients treated by orthodontists, right?
right.
And that's all I've been talking about for the last 10 years. So why you need to do sales, why you need to do all this stuff, run your business better, blah, blah, blah. And like, I also started an OSO. So like the time to publish a book about everything that I know about running a business is not like, at the same time I'm trying to build an OSO. If my goal is to sort of keep the information all for myself, right? Like I think rising tide lifts all ships. We have incredible demand in the marketplace for our services, and we need to capture that as a profession, and then
Yeah.
treat them
Yeah.
well, deliver value for our folks. So anyway,
I
just
I
there.
agree. Hey, we need to speed up. I don't want this to take all night. You've done an awesome
Okay.
job,
I
but
have a
we're gonna.
beer over here that I need to be drinking
Can you
too.
go ahead and open that? Yeah,
Yeah,
go
it's
ahead.
been
It's
open.
again. It's a Guinness. Perfect. Well, it's now been able to settle. It's at the right drinking temperature, I hope.
Yeah,
I want to jump into some of these doctor submitted questions. If you can give a quick answer to this one, this is a great question that someone put up here.
quick is
But
not my strength, as you know,
no,
but
it's
I'll
okay.
try.
It's thorough is also good. But of all the private practices in North America, just give it again an estimate. What percentage are attractive to an OSO?
It's hard to know. I think there's two groups, right? There's the folks that are financially attractive and the folks that are intellectually attractive. And our practices aren't all huge. We've got some folks that have pretty small practices, frankly, but they're the right people. So, I think it's sort of a two-sided coin. We would be interested in folks who want to help us build a great business and folks that are interested in doing the things that the other people say that we should be doing, which is invest in the future of the profession and provide ownership opportunities and mentorship opportunities and do things the right way. So that's what we're looking for. And I don't think that other OSOs are looking for anything different, frankly.
Right. Okay, good. All right, let's come into these doctor submitted questions, and we're just going to roll through these on some level, and we'll take the time we need to take. I don't think there's any like hard stop here.
I could keep going, whatever you need, whatever's useful for folks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, not a lot. The vast majority of our viewership is going to be after the fact, and people, I think, will love having this conversation go as long as it needs to go. Probably another 30 minutes is my guess.
Okay.
So I had like dozens of questions. I asked all these to Neal as well. These are going to be obviously your opinions, but I think it's helpful. I'm a resident. I graduate in a few months. Should I work for a DSO or OSO or not?
I mean, I think it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, Neal told his story about geographically, that was his number one variable. And so he went to work for that place. Right. And then
Yeah.
sound like he had a good deal and worked there for a long time. And then probably sounds like made good money and used that to start his Kravitz empire that he's built.
Yeah.
I think do your homework. I think, given the debt load of the kids today, the students, the doctors,
The kids.
the kids, right? I'm old now.
Grandpa
So
Reynolds. I
yeah,
love it.
you don't see my rocking chair underneath me. But
Way past his bedtime. Yeah, go ahead.
it's different now than it used to be. So the cost to start up an ortho practice is higher, right? And it's higher in some instances than it needs to be. So you don't need to have MacBooks and iCats all over the place. But it is higher, and students have more debt. and someone out there somewhere should shake some sense and business sense into these residencies so they're not charging them so much money.
I
Because that's
agree.
really
Yeah.
the biggest issue, is that the debt leverage that these students have doesn't allow them to start their own practice, which is why one of the big reasons why these OSOs and stuff are entering the cake, because there's more folks who would take it instead of going to open their own thing. And I think the OSOs are more of a consequence of all of that than the cause, frankly. So somebody has, the ivory tower of the residency programs throws shade at anybody who's talking about business, but the debt is crippling, so like
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be that much,
And in fairness, I think a lot of that debt load is dental schools,
Some
because
is, yeah.
some orthodontic residencies. I went to Tennessee; it's basically free. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we also got 50, 60, 70 grand like our medical counterparts? But no, I agree. I think debt has really been maybe the single greatest driver. I think the enemy, or the argument against OSOs, they're the enemy and they're the greedy ones or whatever. But nothing is ever that simple, and I do think that the market produced this sort of incubator for OSOs to succeed. I think also, and we got at this with the conversation with Neal, is that I think that just cultural expectations of the next generation are different. I think there's a lot that want better work-life balance, and for them, that's going and living where they want to live and making $400,000 a year as an associate, or $350,000 as an associate, and don't ever want to own. Yeah, there's more color to that conversation for sure. And I think it obviously depends upon the resident in question. I think I have to be honest. If I'm a resident, I'm thankful that OSOs exist, or that places that will hire me and give me a job in the area that I want to live exist. I think that is a positive.
Agreed.
So anyway, all right, let's go on to this one. Number 10, question number 10. Hey, we're halfway there. I've been told that there are incentives given to OSO doctors or partners in the OSO when someone they refer signs up or even requests like an LOI, let's say, from an OSO. Is this something as a profession that we should be concerned about? I do want to be honest and upfront about some of the concerns that necessarily I have. This is sort of like reminiscent of the whole KOL witch trial thing that happened several years ago, and kind of I think still continues on some level. And to be fair, I think some of that's helpful. I think that biases, or biases, I should say, should be disclosed. Okay. Should that be disclosed as it pertains OSOs and getting people to sign up?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how OSO works. Our partners, it's moved around a little bit, but I think it's $25,000 or something if somebody does a deal, which is like a fraction of a percent of the deal in most of these things. Kaz and I do not, so I get nothing because of my position in the company as a founder. Puts me in a different spot, makes me like ineligible, I suppose. But all of us, the play here is equity appreciation. So if you bring on a crappy practice, then there's a word the investors use. It's called accretive, right? So everybody's worried about being diluted, right? So like that means that I used to own 100% of the company and now I own 50% of the company. So that might be bad. That would be dilutive, right? And as you add partners, your ownership fraction of the company decreases. So it's diluted, whatever. But when the value of your equity in the business is worth more after you add them, that's called accretive. So the goal is it doesn't necessarily, 100% of nothing is a lot worse than 1% of a lot, right? So it's accretive that you're after. And to just sign up a bunch of docs who aren't going to be good and they're not going to row the boat and they're going to mail it in afterwards is not a good investment. And, at least we don't want those guys on our team. So we're really most incentivized by bringing accretive practices so that the value of the equity goes up. And that's irrelevant of a nominal fee that people might get for, referrals. And again, I don't get one. I take one if they give it to me.
Yeah,
I get one would, right?
actually, I want to call on Orthodontic Partners to make right by Jamie, and I hope he gets all the kickbacks from tonight. So I'm kidding. All right, so let's jump into this one. A question on recapitalizations, equity events. Obviously this is kind of the black box, as it were, I think, of the financials surrounding selling your practice to an OSO. Obviously, you get cash at a higher multiple than you would if you sold it to someone else. I think even the most moral and righteous among us would have a hard time justifying selling a practice that is producing $4 million a year for $4 million versus $12 million. You know, it's to be fair, I think it's really easy to be a moralist from either an ivory tower or when it doesn't apply to you. And I'm not in that position, but I just think, just to say it as I said it, if you make 3 times as much selling it to an OSO, that is a hard thing to not do, in fairness.
Yeah.
And that's why I think in this conversation, if it's ever felt like I've been judgmental, I'm not trying to be. Everyone's situation is their situation. I think it's important to have an honest conversation about the pluses and minuses of these things. I think it is an interesting conversation. Is this going to be net good or bad for our profession? We'll get to that later. But how many decisions do people make really at the end of the day based on what is net good or bad for their profession? Most people make it, what's net good for me? What's net bad for me? And that is, at the end of the day, how most people make their decisions, for better or for worse, or whatever you want to say. But the equity event, this recap, this first, second, third bite of the apple, that is kind of what people get enamored with. How likely is it that most OSOs, DSOs are going to experience this recap equity event, and how lucrative will that be? And I know that's a tough question to answer because it's so variable, but tell me what you think.
You know, I think there's a little bit of doubt now because the interest rate environment has sort of put a stop on a lot of these deals, and it's done
Yeah.
for a couple of reasons. One, the interest is unpredictable, and all these finance guys like predictability, and so they can pencil in their spreadsheet how it's going to work. And I think a lot of companies in private equity portfolios aren't doing quite as hot at the moment, and so they're a little bit. Some of them are over their tips, but you know, once things settle down a tiny bit, then there's going to be pent up demand and these things are going to start happening. So here's what I can say. I know that Heartland has recapitalized a bunch of times. And I think, you know, I see pictures of the founder dude with Bugattis and stuff driving around, and like those aren't inexpensive, you know, so it clearly works in some level. A lot of this information isn't public. You can check some of it on PE Wire when the transactions happen. I know that Smile Doctors had a recapitalization event where they had a $2.5 billion valuation, is what I think that published. Scott and Dana and Greg had fantastic practices, but I think the value of them was a couple decimal points the other direction of $2.5 billion. You know, that's a lot of value that they created through there. And I think, you know, some companies aren't, or they're going to have a bad one, get different management, and then have a good one. Some companies, the ones that do things the right way, are going to have several very lucrative recapitalization events, you know, and the doctors that build a great business will be rewarded for that. And it'll be a lot more than you would make by doctoring. And it's just not, it's been happening in other professions, specifically medicine, for a long time, you know, so
Yeah, right on.
it's going to happen. Has happened
All
already.
right.
So.
We are going to take a very short break for another quick message from our sponsor. This is why you all tuned in. But I'll cut through the ad that I was going to read just to say that in reference to Neon Canvas, we support around 250 to 300 orthodontic practices in all 50 states. Our goal, too, is to make sure that patients are seen by orthodontists. And I realize that's a self-serving statement, but that has been a big thing for me, too. I think that is the one thing that connects all of us. And I think the effort of the AAO should remain as such in primary is that patients getting orthodontics are seen by orthodontists. Digital marketing strategies, we work with orthodontists. They do help get more patients into orthodontic practices. We do great work for lots and lots of orthodontists. Any of those out there listening, thank you for that. I would recommend that anyone who's looking to attract more patients to their practice, go and get a free digital marketing audit. It is truly free. It is truly custom. You can figure out all you need to know about your practice and the area surrounding you. That is neoncanvas.com/audit. That is a free thing that Tom Fury will do for you. Only do it if you're serious, because it takes Tom a lot of time, but I would recommend that you do that. And thanks again to Neon Canvas. All right, so let's talk what comes next. We have already mentioned high interest rates. It's probable, at least it's possible, that some orthodontic groups, OSOs, will struggle to stay afloat, or that they'll have to restructure, whatever that means, I guess. What are the implications of that potentially happening, in your opinion?
You know, I'm not sure. I think what the most likely circumstance is that, the equity for the folks involved in that, takes a hit, and
Yeah.
then somebody else becomes part of the management team. Um, I don't think you're going to see like practices sold back to other people or not. There's just too many players in the space. We haven't seen any sort of Pac-Man moments where someone swoops in and buys them, probably because of the interest rate environment. But I think, like if a bank takes over, for example, of a practice, like banks don't want to be entrepreneurs. Banks are like super risk averse, and that's what they do is they squeeze risk down to like infinitesimal. So they don't want to be running businesses. So once they kind of get things back in action, then you probably see someone else come in and rehab them, provided that it's not a circumstance where it's a falling knife, right? And like the doctors have bailed and the business is a mess, but I don't see any of that out in the market. So I think it's just widely impacts the equity of those folks,
Okay.
is my take.
Yeah, right on. All right, so a really common thing that I read, and I'll just say from personal experience, I have a brother who's a pharmacist. I go to the medical office for visits and so on, and let's be honest, medical office environment and culture has never been as good as that of orthodontics. And I think on some level that's a testament to orthodontics as a profession. We are, in the dental realm, the best of the best. I would say I think that's still true. I think it plays to the personality types that a lot of us have, which is we're super duper high achievers, and I think we have good community. You look at the AAO and membership percentages, it's probably higher than any other professions organization. And I think that the Facebook groups, even the last 10 years of those, I think has helped to establish and reestablish certain norms of customer service and so on. And so I think that there is a huge difference already. It's not apples to apples to say pharmacy versus orthodontics. And I do think that naturally pharmacy makes more sense as a commodity driven business than does orthodontics. And you got to that and the whole swing analogy. I always hear the Indian and the arrow for whatever it's worth, but you get the point. How do we make sure, though, that with corporatization, I think it's obviously theoretically more likely that it becomes something like a retail-driven pharmacy or medicine or group practice medicine or whatever. How do we avoid that? How does your organization avoid that? Do you think that that's a potential where orthodontics in 50 years, yeah, don't go into that. It used to be great. It's no longer. How do we avoid that?
I mean, I think the biggest driver is going to be consumers, right? I mean, they've got a drive-through at the Walgreens because people don't want to walk through the Walgreens to get their prescription.
Well, actually, even further, I get my prescriptions mailed to me from Amazon.
Well, right. So I
Because
mean,
I hate, yeah.
I think, if we have working the drive-through in our future, then we probably want to like reassess whether orthodontics is a good profession. But I think we're in a consumer market and convenience-driven market. So, I mean, I don't think it's apples to apples or anywhere close. I mean, a pharmacist is a very knowledgeable person. I'm not throwing shade at anyone, your brother or whatever, but like, so far as I know, they don't participate in the diagnosis or treatment plan or the treatment of the folks. It's sort of like fulfilling a prescription, right? Sort of like making glasses. Like the doctors, the eye doctors, Warby Parker came around and they're prescriptive base. One of the things I said at the beginning of Smile Direct Club was everything that's out there that's direct to consumer has been prescriptive. Pharmacy, glasses, contacts, diabetes care, hearing aids, whatever. It was the first time that someone had tried to do actual treatment in a direct consumer and eliminate the doctor, and it didn't work. I'm not saying that it couldn't work, but it didn't work. And so I just think it's apples and apples. And frankly, like Walgreens, Rite Aid went out of business. Walgreens is closing. Everything's going online. Like, I don't think pharmacies or pharmacists have the greatest run, for the future. We're a service business and we do things over time and we're a relationship business. So like the way that we protect ourselves is we remember that we're a service business and a relationship business, and we do the things in our community. We're out shaking hands. We're not giving everyone a monitoring product and doing everything from the beach, right? I'm not saying that those aren't valuable, but to the extent with which they're a mechanism to be working most of your practice from Ibiza, like that's not going to play in the long term. We're in the relationship business, period. So we need to be embracing that. Honestly, I think it gives us a huge advantage the fact that we're not just a 1 or 2 stop treatment, and we won't be for foreseeable future, and that we have the ability to have relationships with our community and our family at a depth that really doesn't happen in many other places. That's why we have such an amazing profession, regardless of whether you're the owner or not.
Yeah. And I think also we have to recognize that at whatever point what we do can become automated and made more convenient, we're screwed. I mean, screwed in the sense that it will change how we implement orthodontics as we do today.
Maybe. I mean, people said that about Align and a bunch of other things, or the customized braces. I was giving a lecture in probably 2000 and I don't know, 9 or 10 in Mississippi about Insignia, the precursor to Light Force. And somebody told me that like I was part of what was going to ruin the profession. They probably think even worse of me now that I'm doing this, but the doomsday stuff, like there's so many suppliers and now you have all these investors coming in. They're investing so much money in the space of orthodontics. Invisalign did a study a few years ago that we had 3% of market penetration. For the total addressable market, it's like 3%. Now, all the other things that have gone into it, let's say it's doubled, it's 6%. It's even more than that, 10%. So like 85, 90, 95% of the addressable market is still out there. We're just scratching the surface. Everybody's got something at their end of their arm that they're taking pictures of themselves multiple times a day. Having healthy and beautiful teeth has never been more important. So like, I can't be anything but bullish, honestly, on the environment. And that's why you see so much investment in the space. I think there's tons of people who are bullish on the environment. So like all this stuff is so far down the road. I think the doomsday stuff is like, it's not even on my radar, frankly. So
fair enough. Love it. All right. We're getting there. This was the opinion of an orthodontist who messaged me. He just sold to an OSO. He said these were the 3 reasons he thought that someone should sell to an OSO when they ask him. Mm-hmm. I want to get your opinion on these 3 and see if there's any different ones or if you disagree. Number 1, you want a pile of cash. Okay, that's his way of saying it. It's a colloquialism or whatever, but you get it. 2, you want to retire or you have health issues. Or 3, you want to move. Otherwise, he doesn't recommend it. Do you think that this is fair or not?
I was pretty nervous coming into this, and I have a whole pile of notes over here, which I'm not usually like a note taker, or you've probably seen me look over here. Of all the questions, this is the only one I didn't write anything for. I mean, if this is this person's experience, then that's his experience. Yeah. I don't, or his or her, like, I don't know what to say. When we talked about that transition stuff before, like it's important that you measure what's going on in your business. And for whatever reason, I don't think this person felt engaged or part of the team. And that was either because of their choosing or because the organization wasn't managed appropriately. Maybe it was because it was early in the organization and they just weren't good at that yet. Maybe it was because it wasn't part of their core values or an emphasis. Maybe it's some combination. So like, I think if that's that person's opinion, then great. I do think that there are other folks that have different opinions there. So, and again, you need to do your homework. I mean, we talked about a lot of this stuff.
Well, I do want to reveal, Jamie, that the person that wrote this is Jeff Kozlowski.
And we have bigger problems than that, right? We should ask Mike DePascali what he thinks about that.
Sorry to Mike that I mispronounced his name. It's one of those tricky Italian names. Mike, yeah. Hey, Mike. All right, so it's sort of a related question is, so let's say that's, of course, one man's opinion. And I put it in there because, it might ruffle feathers.
I'm not trying to like poo-poo your question, but
that's fine. I think that's one person's opinion. Again, these are not necessarily my opinions. I'm curious though, and this is related, so we'll shift into it. Let's assume there are people that, selling to corporate orthodontics, joining the corporate orthodontic group, whatever, it is a bad fit for them.
Yep.
I want to know, in your opinion, who do you think it's a bad fit for, and then who do you think it's a good fit for?
Yeah, I mean, I think Neal did a good job of hitting on this before. So like, it's a transition from tennis to basketball or whatever sports metaphor you want to use. Like you're playing on your own team versus you're playing on a team. And so you kind of have to be honest with yourself if you're capable of doing that. And I think, if it's just to go to the beach and on your way out, then, you have every right to do that. I think that that's probably more of something that DSOs are after than OSOs. At some point, maybe there'll be a scale which it'll be easier to do that or whatnot. But I think people want engaged folks, So if that's not your thing, and listen, I mean, we do about 5 to 7% of deals to the folks that we talk to. So like a lot of folks, it's not good for them for whatever reason. Some of it's their decision, some of it's ours. I mean, we're looking, speaking for us, for team players who want to help us build an indelible organization, starting from the foundation up. And so, there's a certain type of person that you kind of know when you see it there. That's what we're looking for.
All right. Well, then let's shift into this private practice, because I think this is all connected. There's the circle of life of orthodontic practice modality, let's say. What type of orthodontist is private practice a bad fit for, a good fit for? Obviously, you were a private practice orthodontist for what, 18, 17 years? I don't know, something.
Yeah, for a while. I mean, you've private practice is the best, right? At least it was, I think for you, it was for me, it is for Neal. I like building things. So I got to the point where I couldn't build it anymore for me. And like, this is sort of a natural thing. And now I have help that we can hopefully do some bigger things. I mean, I came from Spillane and Reynolds, and like, I think Neal made the comment that they're there to see Kravitz, like which is a great thing, when I was there, people were there to see Spillane, and so for me, I was always kind of digging out from underneath that. And I thought to myself, hey, I'm paying this guy a lot of money for this practice, so someday they have to be here to see Reynolds, right? And that sort of left me with this thinking of like, I mean, a lot of people have built great practices and there's kind of a blueprint for that. How many people build practices that are the same or better when they're gone, right? Like I just have Jen Bonamici is a new partner in our practice, first partner that I've had since, the last one was me, right? And then before that was Larry. So I feel a lot of responsibility for the ability to like have her do better than me. It's kind of like with your kids, right? And so somebody, I think it was Ben Burr, said to me that you can tell a mentor by how good of a mentor they are, how they treat you after you do better than them, not before. Right. So once you've like grown to be better than them, do they like treat you crappy, or do they like still on your side? And so I don't know. I mean, I think there's a great opportunity to distill the information from a bunch of folks and build a better mousetrap for the folks in front of us with the demand and everything else. And I think it's, for those of us that have been able to achieve a lot of success, is kind of, part of what we should do. And that could be either selling it to a younger doctor who does, or if you don't, like making it so that those doctors are successful, going forward. So
fair enough. We have three
questions there.
No, it's great. 3 questions remaining. I'm going to thank you later, but I'm going to thank you now too, Jamie. Thank you. This has been great. Where do you see, and of course, it turns out you're not a fortune teller. In your bio, you were a lot of things, not a fortune teller. But where do you see
crypto more than I am now if I was a fortune teller?
Well, sure, wouldn't we all? Where do you see OSOs in 5 to 10 years? To whatever degree you can answer that.
I think it's going to be largely the same. In 20 years, there's probably going to be Coke, Pepsi, RC Cola, or some version of that where there's some consolidation. If I'm being a little cocky, like most of this has been the service organization. I mean, OCA went down in flames at the beginning, and since then it's been almost all dental driven organizations until now when you have OSOs in. But orthodontists are the best entrepreneurs in dentistry space by far, and nobody else is even close. So who's to say that once some of these OSOs get a little bit more scale, that we can't start flipping the script and then we start to acquire DSOs and make them more in the vein of orthodontic thinking, and then, and then try to improve on what they've done. I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I think in 5 years it's going to be largely the same. There's a couple that are maybe going through some bumps. This interest environment is challenging for even the best folks and unexpected. But I don't think it'll look all that different. Over time, I think there'll be consolidation because that's just kind of the way things go. But yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think that, so let's say OSOs are, I don't know, 18% of the orthodontic? What's your percentage, just real quickly? Do you know?
I'd have to talk to Chris and Shannon. I don't, last I heard it was closer to 10, 11%.
Okay.
18% seems high from where I Uh,
I have no
it,
idea. I threw out a number. Let's say
I
it's
think
10,
it'll
11. You think it's
plateau
going to
at some
go
point.
up? Or where
Yeah,
will it
it's definitely
plateau?
going
That's the
up.
question.
It's definitely
Yeah.
going up. I mean, it's early. It's slowed down now because the cost of capital and interest and everything. But with the opportunities that people have for younger doctors coming in, for the ability for them to get ownership in the company from an equity perspective, and from doctors out there that just, you know, it's not their time yet for whatever reason. Like there's lots and lots of this consolidation phase is going to continue happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you think it ultimately plateaus? Totally random question. If you don't have an answer, it's fine. But 20%,
I don't know.
30%.
I would say we're closer to 10% at the moment. So I would say, Chris Benson's been telling me 50%. So who might argue with him? But that seems high. Um, you know, I
We'll
think
see.
that doctors have the next iteration for private practice is that doctors have got to figure out how to do it cheaper. you know so like, how can you open up your own practice without being so capital intensive? And if somebody cracks that nut, then I think you'll see some resurgence. But until then, I think OSOs are going to wind up being the spot that most practices over $1.5 million go. And I would say, you touched on this the other day, younger doctors, please don't start skipping out on your non-competes. That is a terrible, terrible idea. I think how you said that it would be bad for corporations. Like, it's going to be really bad for younger doctors, because right now the folks that are selling doctor-to-doctor transactions are typically smaller practices, right? And therefore, I think by the transitive property, they're probably not sophisticated business folks, right? I would say that, the idea that young docs would skip out on their student loans or whatever has not done their image any favors with some of these old docs who were blood, sweat, and tears and bloody knuckles and sleeping in the office to build their thing. And they have their asset that they work their whole life to sell, and they need to trust you. So if they start feeling like you're going to come into their office, learn everything that they could teach you, and then move across the street and open their own thing, and then leave them high and dry, and now their life savings is worth nothing, they are going to run, not walk, into the corporate dentistry side of things. And those practices will evaporate and they won't be available anymore. So, like, open up, work for someplace 7 miles up the street from where you want to go, or 10 miles, or whatever the non-compete is in your area, and then move there later. Not to mention that you're going to make an arch enemy if in your town with half of their referrals and the doctor and their team. But like,
Yeah.
this idea that non-competes are bad for corporate, like, they're really bad if they're not honored for younger doctors, because all those small practices will come parading in, because they don't, the trust has to be there.
Well, I think that will be an interesting conversation. It's not ruled on yet, but there's just been conversation of non-competes being made illegal in certain states or whatever. And so I have to assume there will be some workaround that will come about. But it's sort of pointless to talk about it until it becomes an issue. I do like the coloring around how that will impact a private practice doctor's approach to selling a practice.
I think
If
it'll
that's
make them really
also,
skittish.
yeah, no, sure. I mean, if you don't have a guarantee of that, yeah, that's a scary moment for sure. Okay, we have 2 questions, guys and gals. We have made it almost to the end, and man, it's apparent to me how impossible it would have been to have this debate with 2 doctors at the same time.
I
Like,
thought we both talked too damn much. Neal was
yeah,
super
no,
interesting.
it's
I
okay.
thought it was great. So he did a great job.
No, I think you've both done a great job. I think this topic just deserves more time. And as is always the case with me, I tried to cram, 15 pounds of what into a 5-pound bag. So, it's
Potatoes,
on me.
yeah, for the
Yeah,
Irish holiday.
potatoes.
Potatoes.
Yeah, for the Irish holiday, indeed. Yeah, and they have not rottened yet. Rottened? Is that a verb? All right. So ultimately, rotted, I think, Kyle. Thank you. Ultimately, is corporate orthodontics, in your opinion, good or bad for the profession of orthodontics? And please don't take that question personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if this is a binary question, yes or no, I think the answer is probably, if it's 100 to 0, then the answer was probably no. But like, it's a lot less binary than that, And so
Mm.
I think that there's a incredible value that's being transferred from investment space into the hands of doctors who have worked their ass off to build amazing businesses. So like, I have a hard time seeing anything bad about that. And then there's going to be a place for doctors who are going to remember, like a lot of these things that are being created, when we're talking about OSOs, they're immaculately beautiful offices that have been run and invested in exquisitely. So you're not walking into someplace crap. They're going to walk in with the best treatment, the best braces, 3D imaging, great locations. Like, it is choice, and there's no way in hell that these young docs would be able to do that any other way. They'd be working wherever, so, and I'm not trying to like be whatever about it. It's just the opportunity to work in that environment as a young doctor. There isn't just another avenue to do that in today's environment. So whether they want to make their career out of that is their choice, but I think it's a great option for a lot of folks, especially considering the risk tolerance. So, and this has been long. I can't remember this is in my notes or in my head, but before we started Orthodontic Partners and we were growing, like there was a period of time where I had $50,000 a month in loan payments before I paid a single other expense. I helped mentor several doctors that are not in OSOs just because I like doing the stuff. And one of them, who's a very well-known young doc, lectures and whatnot, has $40,000 a month in payments. Now she's going to crush it, right? But it takes a certain person to do that, and there's a lot of folks that aren't going to be capable of doing that, frankly. So it's a heavier load to bear than it used to because of the cost of capital, the cost of opening a business and the competitiveness. It's more competitive than it was before. And major metros are tough, so I think if you were going to do it, look someplace on like a few rings of Saturn away from the the hub, and I would love for folks who are trying to build a practice to reach out and talk to me. I'm happy to help you get the book. That's the whole point. But I think the corporate spots are going to be good landing spots. I mean, Neal proved that you could go there for a bit, make some money, and start your own practice, which, if you want to do, you want to have a landing pad. And I think a lot of us are trying very hard to make the OSO space a great place for a certain layer of the orthodontic profession to live and thrive in. So it just remains to be seen whether we can pull it off or not.
That's great. Love that. All right, last question. I will edit out all my little commentary and just come to this question is, how do we keep the profession of orthodontics unified despite our differences? I mean, obviously, you take a lot of heat, and I'm sure you've read some nasty stuff that people have written or said or whatever. I just sort of feel, though, that at the end of the day that most people are kind of moderate on this topic on some level. I mean, obviously, if 85% of the profession is private practicing orthodontists or somewhere around that range, obviously the resting opinion is going to be more pro private practice than pro corporate orthodontics.
As it should be.
Numbers.
As it should be,
Yeah.
Kyle.
And this is also not to say, as you sort of alluded to at the beginning, that you're anti-private practice.
Mm-mm.
I think any more than someone, I can't speak for Neal, but I can speak for myself, any more than I'm anti-corporate orthodontics. I'm interested more than anything in the conversation. I love thinking through the ins and outs and the logical, aspects of this. I think you and I are the same in that way. I'm also, at the end of the day, this is a Pandora's box that will not be closed. There is good and bad to it, and I think you have been honest about that, and I appreciate you for that. That's why I asked you on here. But let's just kind of go to brass tacks. How do we make sure that corporate orthodontists and their organizations continue to support, let's just make it about the AAO, but also just the profession at large? How do we maintain that? Because I think it's important as we move forward.
I mean, yeah, you and I have had a lot of conversation about this and other avenues and whatnot. We're all in the same boat, and so the rising tide lifts all ships. And so what we have to do is to be the place where the orthodontic consumer looks for their orthodontic treatment. And then if we don't preserve our clinical gold standard and our ability to build relationships and our ability to create value, I mean, I say this ad infinitum, you give me crap for it, but like, you got to create value for your folks. Like you have to give them more value than they expect in the transaction. And so we have to work together to do that. I mean, I don't read a lot of the stuff. I don't happen to be a member of the Facebook group where I probably get the most arrows, especially starting a few weeks ago in this evening. I don't care to know. I feel good about what I'm trying to do. And I think in general, like most folks are trying to do what they can do well. I had in my notes here, it depends on what your goal is. Is your goal that the orthodontic patient be treated by an orthodontist, or is your goal that the orthodontic patient be treated by you? And so I think, strategically, there's two different answers to that. One of which you can think about, like, how do we get the orthodontic patient to be treated by someone in our profession? And there's I think a logical and strategic path that you can take. But when you worry about yourself, the immediate emotion that comes in there is fear, right? And so it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I've got all these other things, and it's going to change my life, this, that, and the other, which I understand, but I don't think that's the way that we protect our profession. I don't think by, slinging a lot of arrows at a lot of folks who are, doing whatever, just because they lecture for a company, that means that they're bought and paid for and never should be trusted or taken seriously again, or evil human being. Like, that's a bunch of crap, right? So, like, I think we should, all do a better job of engaging with our big organization. I think the AAO engagement is getting better. I work with a lot of folks, like, kudos to Neal and folks like them that are doing a good job getting the AAO to be more relevant. I think supporting our organization is super important, and it starts there. And then, I don't know, open communication and collaboration is always a good thing, regardless of which side of the coin that you're on, because again, rising tide lifts all ships. Our patients don't really know the difference. Some of them, if you go to Aspen Dental do, most of these OSOs, they have no idea, and they never will. So, it feels like an orthodontist that walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. And we should all realize that we're ducks, and so, we should be more of a flock than anything else. That was a really terrible metaphor or analogy, but
no,
anyway.
It's okay. I do think a group of ducks is called, let's see, I'm Googling. It is a flock.
Yeah, I did not know that, and I figured you were about to prove me wrong. So what a way to end this. Flock this.
Jamie just won the debate by knowing what a group of ducks was.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just kidding. No, I think there is no winner here. I think that Neal did a great job. I think that Jamie did a great job. I do have a couple things to mention before I come back around to straight up thanking Jamie and really giving him a ton of respect for doing this. I guess I'm already starting to do that, but I do want, and he takes a well-deserved drink of his Guinness. I do think there is something I want everyone to know about. Okay, so I'm going to do that really quickly. If I can find my, let's see, where is that at? Goodness gracious, here it is. There we go. Are you seeing that now, Jamie? Do you see that?
Orthomania.
Yeah, Orthomania. So. Will you? Great. Well, tickets go on sale this week, and I want everyone who's watching to get some tickets to this. We're only like a month and a half out from the AO in New Orleans. I hope you're going. Yes, I know it's Jazz Fest. Yes, I know hotels are expensive, but man, what a great weekend to be there, and it's also Jazz Fest. You can see the Rolling Stones. You can see Relapse. Why not? But Relapse is throwing an enormous party Friday, May 3rd. That is my birthday. It is my 40th birthday. It's the night before the AO begins. So please plan to fly in on Friday afternoon. Celebrate my birthday. There's going to be an orthodontist who's a DJ. There's going to be an orthodontist who plays guitar. He sounds just like John Mayer. He's going to be doing the happy hour, which is sponsored by Lead Sigma. This event is being presented by Angel Aligner. We also have some other co-hosts of this and sponsors, some really great companies. You'll be seeing a lot more about this starting tomorrow, and tickets will go on sale. They're going to be a reasonable price. I hope that you'll come. I am saying it right now. This is the last time I will ever organize a party like this because it is so much work, and I have other things I would like to do with my time.
Will we get to see Chris Teeter's abs?
I hope so.
Okay, I'm definitely coming now. Yeah,
Chris Teeters is great. Chris is the most disciplined and hardworking person I know. And he just entered into this fitness competition and won first place and a bunch of stuff. So Chris, he wakes up every morning, probably at like 3:30 in the morning. He gets on the treadmill. He practices guitar. He walks. He's probably also doing like 2.5 times speed podcast to learn some other new language or technique. Love Chris, hardworking guy. I'm also excited. I don't have an image for this, but I've been spending the last year and a half on an iPhone Android app. Jamie, you know what it's like to develop a program and to go through all that. It's a lot of work. It's going to feature lead follow-up software called Contour. It's going to be made available to all Neon Canvas clients. I'm very proud of it. I try to have a project that I'm working on year over year. I think this will be the greatest thing I've done, I hope. And I say it's not just me. This is the team at Neon Canvas. We have an awesome team working with Lead Sigma as well. It's going to launch in May. And so I would just say this, please come by our booth at the AO and check it out. I'm very excited about it. I also want to thank you, who's still staying around after an hour and 55 minutes. This is my longest podcast ever. And I don't mean that in a critical sense. It's just there's been a lot to talk about. Thank you for watching this. Give me a 5-star review if you don't mind. Subscribe if you haven't already. And finally, thank you for spending your Sunday night, your St. Patrick's Day with us. You could have been doing some other stuff. And I want to sincerely thank Jamie for being on here. He did an awesome job, Dr. Jamie Reynolds.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. This is not something that most people would want to do. It's hard to come on here, and I think you crushed it. I think you did a great job of threading that needle. Thank you also to Anna, Alan, Scott, Kayla, Alex, and the TDO team at Neon Canvas. And special thanks again to our sponsor tonight, Neon Canvas. And from all of us here at the Digital Orthodontist Live, I'm Dr. Kyle Fagala, and I am signing off. And I may go enjoy an Irish-themed beer or two. I don't know. And then I'll get this thing uploaded, and I'll eventually fall asleep. But that's all we got. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Guys, have a wonderful night. Thank you.